Can fasting and food timing hold the key to preventing Alzheimer's? Today, we're diving into the science of longevity and neuroprotection with one of the world's leading experts on fasting and aging, Dr. Valter Longo. Get ready to explore how the fasting-mimicking diet could become a tool in your brain health arsenal and what new frontiers he's unlocking in the war against neurodegeneration. Peace and plants. Dr. Valter Longo is the director of the USC Longevity Institute and the Program on Longevity and Cancer at IFOM in Milan. He's a renowned scientist, international best-selling author of The Longevity Diet, and the inventor of the fasting-mimicking diet, also known as FMD. His research focuses on how short, periodic fasting can trigger regeneration, reduce inflammation, and protect against age-related diseases, including Alzheimer's. What if the secret to protecting your brain wasn't in a pill, but in the way you don't eat? Dr. Longo, welcome to the Alzheimer's Breakthrough Podcast. It is a real honor to have you here. I've followed you for over 10 years. You are one of the key figures in the modern use of fasting and the fasting-mimicking diet. So let's start here. What focused your career on aging and longevity? And how did you get into this whole field?
Well, I've always been in that field since my second year in college in Texas. And since then, that's all I've ever wanted to do was study aging and, genetics of aging first, and then eventually nutrition affects the genes that affect aging. So that's all I've ever done, at least since I was a musician, right? Before that, I was a musician, a jazz performance major at the University of North Texas. Since then, I focused on biochemistry and the study of aging.
And you have 2 degrees in biochemistry, which is amazing. What drew your attention to the brain and neurodegeneration when you did your postdoc?
I just thought that probably the brain, at least to me, the brain was the ultimate challenge. I felt that even if we were able to reverse aging, like, a little bit of science fiction, right? Let's say you were able to reverse aging in lots of different systems. I always felt the ultimate challenge is going to be how do you make a brain younger or young without affecting its just extremely sophisticated function and job. Yeah.
Awesome. And you actually, with your research as a postdoc at USC in Los Angeles, how you actually researched amyloid, I believe, and the soluble and the insoluble. What are your thoughts now on the amyloid theory of Alzheimer's?
I was fortunate to work with Caleb Finch and also work next to Christian Pike, both of them, stars in the field of Alzheimer. And so I think it's pretty hard to get away from beta amyloid having some involvement, right? And particularly if you look at some of the mutations in APP causing early onset Alzheimer's, right? So it's just hard to imagine how that could be a coincidence that if you have a mutation in that gene, you can end up, with Alzheimer when you're 42. So I think the beta amyloid, it's there, it's got a role. Now, I'm not sure what the role is because I think there's a lot of uncertainty about is it aggregation, is it oligomerization, just these groups of peptides that are doing the damage, or is it activating the immune system or the microglia? I mean, I like that hypothesis, right? I like the hypothesis, which is one of our own hypothesis, my own, that beta amyloid, and not just beta amyloid, would trigger inflammatory responses, and particularly, and this is something we published, over 20 years ago, and particularly the generation of superoxide and nitric oxide, and therefore peroxynitrite. And this peroxynitrite can travel and do really remarkable damage. When we published first this in 2002, I think it was, we could show that if we put the immune cells, I'm just going to call them that, microglia, but I call them immune cells for simplicity. if we put the immune cells on top of the neurons, and then we introduce beta amyloid, the immune cells would generate such a tremendous level of peroxynitrite that there would be a circle under the immune cells of death, right? They just kill everything, and it was pretty far because we used these co-culture systems where, the immune cells were pretty far from the neurons, and yet it just completely wiped out any neuron was within distance. That's when I started thinking, this could do it, right? This could, having this junk, and no matter what the junk is, and this microglia try, and not just microglia, but maybe some other inflammatory cells. And then eventually of course, they're not there to remove these very tough beta amyloid aggregates or oligomers. And that's just a lost cause. And you can see how this is going to become a chronic inflammation, and eventually it could fry the brain of a patient.
Wow. So what are because you've studied not just the brain and neurodegeneration, you've actually studied aging in general, from yeast to rodents to humans. And do you think aging in the brain is different than aging elsewhere in the body?
Yes, in the sense that now there is a new idea about organ-specific aging, right? There is new research indicating that you could be very healthy, but your liver is very old, right? So you could be very healthy, but your brain is 20 years older than your chronological age. Yeah, so I think that, aging rules Alzheimer's, and meaning like that's by far, far, far the number one risk factor, right? And everything else comes very, very much lower. So yeah, so aging is in charge, but it is possible that aging of the brain, like what I just described, right? Beta amyloid may not really be at high levels anywhere else, or amyloids in general. I mean, there are different amyloids, but the type in the brain could generate a brain-specific problem that, may have little to do with the rest of the body. Now, that's unlikely because we know that diabetes nearly doubles, having had diabetes nearly doubles the risk of Alzheimer's. So yeah, what I just said is unlikely. There's like a systemic problem contributing then to the local problem. But I mean, they can still go in separate ways, probably.
Right. So what do you think is actually happening when you're fasting? What actually happens in the brain when you fast?
Well, fasting really probably has the most powerful changes that you can imagine in the brain, right? Everywhere, but especially in the brain, right? So I always, and this is a challenge for you too, right? So you find something that will cause more gene expression changes in the brain than fasting, right? I doubt that you find it. So why? Because now the metabolism of the brain is completely changed into a ketone body / glucose / lactate metabolism. And so that to most people probably never happens in their entire lives, right? So that the brain of most people out there, including those that have had Alzheimer's, and was never in a full ketogenic modality where you may have 50% of the energy in the brain generated by ketone body metabolism. So yeah, and then lots of things, of course, happen that BDNF goes up, and probably almost every neurotransmitter is somehow affected, as well as the endocrinological factors that also reach the brain. So yeah, so everything changes, like IGF-1 and growth hormone, and growth hormone releasing hormone, and on and on.
Sure. So I've actually heard or read that when you exercise, the biochemical changes, what your cells see, are almost identical to when you fast. Do you think that's true?
No, I mean, we know it's not true because, ketone bodies in a person exercising, I'm not even sure they go up, right? So, I mean, there are similarities, and people like to make this comparison. But, I mean, clearly, if you look at the aging field, exercise has always been a distant second compared to dietary restriction and dietary intervention. So if you look at a mouse living longer, a rat living longer, a worm, a monkey, you don't really see too much exercise studies saying, oh, I got a 37% increase in the lifespan of a mouse. You don't see that. You see small effects, good effects, right? Important effects, but not in the same range, right? So I think it's probably true. I've seen recently somebody say 80% nutrition and fasting and 20% exercise. That's about correct. If I had to give a number to the power of one and the other, so I'd say 80% what you eat or you don't eat, and 20% your exercise.
Sure. So another thing I notice when I fast is that most of the time I'm not thinking as well. I'm definitely calmer, but I don't have as much energy, not just to move around, but actually to think. And so it's kind of interesting that, at least from your research and from Dr. Mark Mattson, that there's something special about fasting with the brain long term. But how do you explain? Do you understand the dichotomy I'm trying to describe here? Where on the one hand, if you do fast or do your fasting mimicking diet, you may.
Yeah. So first of all, I always say, I start the interviews by saying fasting doesn't mean anything, right? It's very important, right? Because it's like eating. If you were asking me the same question about eating, I've done eating, and it's good and bad from my memory. Well, I would say, well, what kind of eating did you do, right? So fasting is the same way. Now, unfortunately, I don't know why people like to you can fast for 13 hours, or you can fast for 13 days or 130 days, right? It's completely different. One could be neutral, one could be very good, and one could be terrible for you. And then, I mean, of course, first of all, there's personalization, meaning some people during the fasting or fasting mimicking diet, they feel a lot sharper, right? And some people feel a lot confused. So I think it's personal, and it makes sense, right? Because some people might become hypoglycemic, for example, during fasting, and that hypoglycemia may make it difficult for them. Like for anybody for whom you will have hypoglycemia, they become confused and all of that, right? So hypotense and hypoglycemic, right? If you have one or both of those, so if you're a person that already starts with systolic blood pressure of 100, and then you tend to have low blood glucose, now all of a sudden you may be in trouble, right? But other people instead, probably because of BDNF and lots of these factors go up, they feel very sharp, right? So we had one person, I remember, told us, I could never play a piano piece, never in my life, from beginning to end. The only time I was able to finish is during the fasting mimicking diet. So that's pretty good, right? Because somebody who plays piano, it could never complete that piece, beginning to end. They know exactly what they can do and they cannot, right? And so, so in some people it has that effect. And in mice, clearly has that effect. The mice are very sharp, right? They can, whether we use novel object recognition, the Barnes maze, we use Y maze, we use all these cognitive tasks, fear conditioning, they are much sharper, right? Some of the, like, especially novel objects, some of the effects are remarkable. They completely revolutionizes their ability to find a novel object and distinguish it from an object they've seen before, right? So I would say that probably has the potential even during, and it makes sense. These are things that everybody says, but it makes sense, right? That if you're starving, you'll be much sharper at remembering where things were, remembering old objects, being able to recognize different objects, so that you find food or shelter or whatever it is that you need. So to me, it probably would make more sense that there is a cognitive enhancement even during the fasting. But certainly we see it very consistently after the fasting, right? So everybody unites after, and people say, now that I return to normal food, now I can think better. And this is very common.
That's awesome. So can you walk our viewers or listeners through what a fasting mimicking diet is, and how in the world did you decide on 5 days?
Well, we didn't decide on 5 days, so from these go from 4 to 7 days. So for example, for cancer, we used a lot a 4-day version. for multiple sclerosis and other autoimmunities, we use a 7-day version. So the fasting-mimicking diet came many years ago when we ran a trial on cancer patients at USC Norris Cancer Center, and convinced that water-only fasting would be something that a motivated cancer patient would be able to do. And it turned out that the cancer patient said, no, this is not something that I'm willing to accept. And they didn't accept it, right? So it took us a long, long time. It took the clinic, the hospital, a long time to recruit enough patients. And so we turned to the U.S. government and we asked, and they gave us funds for developing a fasting mimicking diet. And in 5 days, it's a low calorie, low sugar, low protein, high fat, plant-based diet. So I made the decision 20 years ago that it should be very healthy, because I knew that it was going to be useful for much more than cancer patients, right? So I said, let me come up with something very healthy, because people end up doing it once a month. I don't want them to have a fasting mimicking diet that is a terrible composition once a month for 5 days, right? So so I think it was a good choice, and it's a very healthy fasting mimicking diet.
That's awesome. And is there anyone who shouldn't fast with this diet?
Yeah, lots of people shouldn't fast, right? So people that are anorexic, people that, above age 70. Now, of course, we've just finished a clinical trial on Alzheimer's, and the patients were up to 85. They did fine, right? I mean, we already published some of the data. So, but I think after 70, I would probably, I think that the doctor should become involved and say, yeah, I think you're fine. Because somebody could be 72 chronologically and really, 55 biologically, right? So it makes no sense to, but I would want the doctor to say, yeah, you're fine, go ahead and do it. And versus the doctor saying, I don't think so. I mean, you're frail. You have, I'm afraid you're going to pass out, or, things that the doctor, especially a general practitioner that follows that person, may know very well. And and then, pregnant women, there is a long list, and the fasting mimicking diet has the list, I think, published somewhere.
Sure. And so it's exciting. You recently published safety data on Alzheimer's patients showing that fasting mimicking diet was safe. Isn't that right?
Yeah. The safety data was good, and pretty soon we're going to publish the full study. And I mean, we knew it was safe up to age 70, because, now I think a couple of thousand people have gone through formal trials in many different universities. But we didn't know it was safe in the 85-year-old. I mean, to tell you the truth, I thought we were going to see a lot more people dropping out, feeling like, we cannot stay in the trial because of the weight loss or whatever. But we did anticipate that, and we gave them an extra, I think, 400 kilocalories of a ketogenic element per day, all days of the month, right? So not only we made the 5 days going from, say 900 kilocalories on average to 1,300, but then we give them an extra supplement for the entire month every day. So that worked out. I think it was probably a good idea to do it that way.
Got it. And was the supplement, was it the glycerol, or was it, what did you actually use in the study?
No, the supplement was mostly, healthy fats like chocolate, nuts, and lots of high ketogenic supplement. Of course, we did not make their diet ketogenic, so we did not remove carbohydrates or sugars from the diet. But we felt that we're not going to contribute to the high sugar component. We're just going to come in with a ketone body generating, or certainly promoting, 400 kilocalories per day. And especially because that had been shown by others to be potentially effective in delaying cognitive decline. And that's why we decided to do that.
Cool. So it sounds like the exogenous ketones actually may have helped some of the more senior people in the study. Is that right?
I think the fats, right? We did not give them ketone bodies.
Oh, okay.
So the exogenous fats, I think, helped them. I mean, first of all, took advantage a little bit of the success shown by others, right? Maybe, I don't know, there's nothing conclusive about that, but certainly ketogenic diet potentially helping. And then it worked in the sense of preventing patients from dropping out or from having side effects that the neurologist felt they were reason to exclude them or stop the diet.
Got it. What do you think about exogenous ketones in patients like this, or you just haven't studied it yet?
We have studied it. I mean, others are studying it, and so I think it's promising. I think it's promising, especially for Alzheimer's, because they could be what we see there. We see multi-system stem cell activation, multi-system reprogramming, epigenetic reprogramming. We see multi-system autophagy. So I think that the ketone bodies could be mediating some of these effects. I mean, we don't know, probably not a lot of these effects, but some. So yeah. So I think it's great. Other people are going to do it. I think we just need to wait and see.
That's awesome. So, I mean, so what I love again is that you've actually done clinical research in people showing that the fasting mimicking diet can help people lose weight, help them reverse diabetes, help them turn back their biologic clock. And I can't wait to see the data when they come out specifically for Alzheimer's.
Now the Damas group at University of Miami just published on colitis, and Stanford is about to publish on Crohn's disease. So, I mean, we publish on multiple sclerosis. So a lot of inflammatory. Now you're going to see lots of papers. I mean, we published in mice before, but now you're starting to see the clinical papers on Crohn's, colitis, MS. So I think, because of the clear inflammatory component in dementia, that's good news, right? That's good news, that especially if we're starting to see neuroinflammatory, like in the case of multiple sclerosis, neuroinflammatory amelioration. So I think that's very good. But also the systemic one, the T cell and lymphocyte and macrophage-based problems, I think if we started seeing those, for example, a C-reactive protein, it was not a clear cut, but amyloid A, C-reactive protein, prednisone use, and calprotectin, all these inflammatory markers are certainly, associated with, reducing inflammation. They were reduced only in the FMD plus the drug group in the ulcerative colitis trial, right? So very interesting. Small group, but very clear effects. Some of these markers drop down by tenfold. So I think calprotectin dropped by more than tenfold. Yeah, so I think that the systemic, but plus initial evidence for brain-specific effects, it's very promising. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if for Alzheimer's, like we've seen for cancer, like for diabetes, pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome, I think the FMD plus whatever lifestyle changes you can do is plenty, right? It doesn't need anything else. But I think for Alzheimer, for cancer, no, I think we need the drugs, right? We need the combination of the drugs. And I think for Alzheimer, I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's going to be working, right? Dietary intervention plus the drugs. And together, maybe we'll start seeing some, unfortunate, because a lot of pharmaceutical companies are not set like that. They just want to show their effect. But, and this may be why it failed so miserably so far with Alzheimer's, right? I think if they're open-minded and say, okay, why don't we get a true, cognitive and brain reprogramming, right, going on that affects insulin resistance, affects leptin resistance, and affects a lot of function in the brain, but also systemically. And then we add whatever drug we think they could do even better. That's a much smarter way, especially if you consider how bad of a shape a brain of an Alzheimer patient is already, and bringing it back with a drug, I mean, good luck with that, right? So I think that the only way I think you could bring it back if you hit some master regulator of regeneration, multisystemic or systemic regeneration. But just removing beta amyloid, to me, it just doesn't seem, or that those kind of intervention, they don't seem to be. They seem to be far from something that I think could work.
I agree with you. Let me ask you something else I noticed. I think you did in your research as a postdoc, looking at toxicity. I mean, you mentioned multiple sclerosis. I know in some cases of Alzheimer's, we're dealing with toxins, whether it's heavy metals or plastics or PCBs. Have you looked in your research in people, have you looked at toxin levels before and after fasting mimicking diet?
We always wanted to do that, right? And we never got around to do it. We started doing it with lead, right? So, like 10 years ago, one of the postdocs in my lab said, let's just work on lead, right? And then he came back and he said, you know what? I keep giving these mice a lot of lead. They don't care. So, and it played that dual thing. It was just like, we couldn't do the experiment. But then I also thought, probably these metals are toxic, are bad, but they're not as bad as some other things that we're dealing with, like peroxynitride and beta amyloid, and the system trying to remove this aggregate of peptides. Yeah, so that was my view. I think we should do it, and I can't wait until we have some funds to do it. I know that Caleb Finch has done it with pollution, micro particles from highways, and so they got some really nice data from those studies. He did a series of very nice studies. So I think clearly pollution is involved, but I think that because you see diabetes doubling, Alzheimer, I'm just shocked at how little we're spending on understanding metabolic aging and aging, right? That's by far the way to treat Alzheimer's first, right? And then, of course, drugs will come. But as you know, right, if you delay, the onset by 5 to 10 years, you will cut the cases in half, right? So that's a slam dunk, right? We need to work on aging and systemic health, right? So if somebody systemic is much healthier, so let's say ApoE4 heterozygotes or homozygotes. It's just unbelievable that we don't have a national program to help them, stay metabolically and longevity wise as healthy as possible from age 25, right? That's what we should do. And the system is just not set up for that. It's set up to let's wait until somebody with ApoE4 homozygosity gets Alzheimer's, dementia, and then we'll give them drugs that don't work, right? So,
right.
It's just crazy, right?
It is crazy, yeah. But the amazing thing is, just tracking your career, I think, fortunately, society is much more receptive now about the reversing aging approach than they were when you started 20 years ago.
Society is beginning. We've done some surveys, and most people don't even know what longevity means. So I think it's beginning, and doctors are not even beginning, right? So I think that most doctors are not even beginning, and society is beginning. And but yeah, there's a lot of interest in aging, and it's good. It's a good start. It's completely different from 30 years ago. I agree. I always say, when I was at UCLA in pathology and in biochemistry, I was ashamed of, I wouldn't say I was working on aging, right? Because people were making fun of this, which is now is like crazy to think about. Now people are showing off. I work in an aging lab, or I work in a longevity lab. But in the early 90s, it was embarrassing to be working on aging. And actually, the most embarrassing thing was working on aging and starvation, right? I picked the two loser topics. If you were like, at aging and then starving bacteria, starving yeast, who would you possibly do that?
But I'd say so far you've had the last laugh, because what you've done, what you've shown is it's amazing that you are able to prevent and reverse these different diseases. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's exciting for that, but it's also exciting that a lot of top clinicians, are contacting us and say, hey, can you help us with this trial, that trial? And they go out and get a foundation, the government of Germany, Holland, the United States, and, like Dr. Friedland at Cedars-Sinai just got a NIH-funded prostate cancer NFMD grant. So, yes, it's exciting to see that. And it's exciting to see the feasibility of it. And people say, okay, once a month, maybe once every 3 months or 4 months, yeah, I can do this. and the compliance has been fairly high, with a few exceptions. But so NA is worked for a lot more trials than we will possibly hope for. I mean, you would think you're lucky if it works in 10%, right, of the trials. I mean, we're now getting 70-80% success in trials that have been coming out. So remarkable, like the latest one, hyposmia, right? And interesting for Alzheimer, right? So patients that are overweight and obese, this is a collaboration with University of Rome, Tor Vergata, 100-patient randomized crossover trial. So pretty good size, right? Pretty good size. And they start with 30-40% hyposmia. And 3 cycles of the FMD, it completely wipes out the hyposmia, right? So the olfactory chemosensory function, within a few months. I mean, no, sorry, 6 cycles, 6 monthly cycles. But still remarkable that I think it went from 38% on average to 6% after the 6 cycles.
Yeah, that is remarkable, and obviously, anosmia smelling is part of the brain function. It's the first cranial nerve. We're talking about the brain here. So, how often do you recommend? And again, I know you haven't published the full results yet, but for someone with Alzheimer's, or how often do you recommend people do the fasting mimicking diet?
Well, first of all, I recommend that they work with the foundation, right? In Los Angeles, they're a nonprofit, and we have a team of nutrition, some PhDs and some not PhDs. And then we're working with the neurologist, whoever that neurologist is. And the idea is to enter a program. Some of them, if you cannot afford it, it's free, and if you can afford it, it goes as different levels. Yeah, so we want to spend a lot of time, or as much time as we can, to make sure we help them, we guide them. And so, yeah, some people may not want to do the FMD at all, and some people may want to do it once a month. But we don't just do FMD. We do FMD, longevity diet, time restricted eating, exercise. It's a lifestyle program that we try to personalize. Also keeping in mind what it's likely that a person can handle at a specific time. This is why, I don't like to give recommendation, because, one person can do it once a month, and the other person is lucky if they can do it once a year, but maybe they can do something else.
Right. Wow. So you mentioned that you actually gave some fats during the recent study. Do you add any other supplements to or medications to the protocol?
Yeah, we added what we thought it was already associated with benefits, and not conclusively, but very safe and already associated with benefits. So we added caffeine, we added olive oil, trials. There's multiple trials, some of them big, associating high intake of olive oil with some cognitive benefits. So we felt, hey, this is very safe. It is a good way. Let's supplement the caffeine and the meat chain fatty acids and the olive oil, to a very, very safe level. And, we ended up with that, and 400 contained within 400 kilocalories per day.
Okay. And you mentioned caffeine. What about I've also seen like in rodent studies showing that after you take caffeine, you have decreased blood supply to your frontal lobe of the brain. Are you familiar with those studies, or?
Yeah, I think, we always look at, overall, because, there's, of course, a lot of negative studies on caffeine, right? And then eventually, I think most studies show that it has benefits. So, yeah, we looked at the data overall, and we felt that it was associated with more benefits than problems. But it is possible that, if you have frontal lobe dementia, or that may be worse for you. But this is not something that we felt it was worthy of. I mean, this is the equivalent of a couple of cups of coffee a day. And also, we were considering the literature on Parkinson's disease that now is pretty conclusive on, let's say, 4 or 5 cups a day, and at least the association. So, yeah, we felt it was a good recommendation, which, we're willing to take out if somebody can demonstrate it makes it worse for an Alzheimer patient.
I understand. If I could ask you a lightning round now, just some rapid questions. Is that okay? Just kind of quick yes, no, or
sure.
Right? What is one supplement you personally take for brain health?
I take a multivitamin and omega-3 supplement.
Very cool. And what's more dangerous for the brain? Is it sugar or chronic stress?
The brain works on sugar, right? It's the fuel of the brain is sugar. So I think excess sugar for sure. Insulin resistance is a big enemy, and stress. Yeah, I think stress can be an enemy or not, right? It depends who's stressed and how much they're stressed. And people in New York City have a long life. In Manhattan, right? They live long. So you can be stressed, and if you do all the right things, you might live a couple of years shorter, but you can still probably live a pretty long life.
Awesome. What's the biggest scientific myth you'd like to debunk?
That high protein diets are good for you.
Understood. Wow. Is there a medical dogma you disagree with?
Most of it.
Awesome. And are humans biologically built to live to over 100?
They're not built to live over 100, but they certainly can get there at a higher rate than we have right now if all the right things are done.
And what's your guilty pleasure food?
Chocolate.
Awesome. And how would you want your legacy described in one sentence?
I think, having helped a lot of people live longer, healthier.
Awesome. And what's the first thing you do each morning?
Have a almond chocolate spread that I generated myself because I couldn't find it, so I had my company make it. Where I eat, and then I have friselle from a place near here in southern Italy, shipped to the United States, and these are like this bread, whole grain bread, hard. And then, so I have tea and that, and this very high level. So it's basically cocoa and almonds, and that's it, and a little bit of sugar.
Awesome. So what one area I'd love your opinion on is, and actually it's another FMD, not the fasting mimicking diet, but flow mediated dilation studies of olive oil. I know you're a fan of olive oil, your company makes it, etc. But what do you think of the studies on flow mediated dilatation? After I think Vogel et al. The studies for humans after they eat a fatty meal, say with olive oil. What are your thoughts on studies like that?
I mean, you have a lot of hormesis studies, right? So something that could have a partially bad effect could be very good for you. And so we know exercise, for example, a lot of theories, a lot of studies indicating that exercise does micro damage to the heart and possibly the cardiovascular system in general. Yeah. So having this is a one pillar view, right? So I think if you look at centenarians, they're loaded with olive oil. If you look at the Astroc study, some of the studies like low fat diet, following more some of the U.S. Recommendations for cardiovascular disease, and then you compare it with 150 ml per day of olive oil, they had to stop the study after 5 years because the people on high olive oil were doing so much better. And these are people with already cardiovascular disease diagnosed, right? Yeah, I mean, it's like if you look at the Mediterranean diet, certainly the biggest effects in meta-analysis are on cognitive diseases, right? I think 12% reduction in some of the biggest meta-analysis done. So I think over and over and over, you see the olive oil doing very well, and so you cannot take one study saying, "Oh, if I take that, I have some elasticity issues or whatever," and so I use that against 30 meta-analysis, for example, right? I mean, there are now probably more than 30 meta-analysis on the Mediterranean diet. And there's one thing that is common to the Mediterranean diet is lots of olive oil, right? And so, and Ansel Keys, I don't think he will have, I mean, yeah, I think it's also good to look at historical data like Ansel Keys and the Mediterranean diet. The origin it started because of cardiovascular disease, right? And so, yeah, maybe less cognitive, but certainly I think that if you look at overall health, yeah, you go with olive oil, lots of olive oil, and unless there is a reason not to do it.
Awesome. And so I'm curious, why in your fasting mimicking diet kit do you use glycerol instead of olive oil, for example?
We use olive oil and we use glycerol. I mean, glycerol is a fasting response molecule, right? And it is in our trehalose and glycerol. It is in yeast, and it's very conserved, right? And so, and if you look at the way yeast protects itself, it gets rid of ethanol and replaces it with glycerol, right? And if you take a person and you fast them, glycerol will be released, right? And it'll be used for gluconeogenesis. Yeah, so I think that glycerol is there because it's a fasting response molecule, which can be utilized when the system needs to utilize it to make glucose. And that's exactly what we want. But also it's a mild laxative, and it's got a lot of features that I felt they were so together, the yeast and the laxative and the fasting response and the gluconeogenesis and the reserve. I mean, if you put it all together, you give a check glycerol.
Awesome. So, and I think you, at one point, you changed from the original kit from the FMD to a new kit. What changes did you make? Was it just different flavors, or did you actually did you learn something from the earlier studies that made you change the kit?
I mean, I don't make kits, right? I mean, there's a company that make kits. I happen to have founded that company, and I happen to also give everything to charity or research. But yeah, I know the original formulation is pretty much the same, but people complain about things, and so taste and this and that, and so compliance is very important. So I help the company come up with versions that are true to the composition and formulation, but they can also make it easier for people. I think now there's a new version that everybody likes that is wet, right? That comes already sort of pre-made, but it's the same formulation as the one that was dried, right? So
Awesome. What's one or the most overrated anti-aging trend right now? I mean, obviously you've helped create this industry, but what do you think is overrated in the whole industry right now?
GLP-1 for sure, right? I mean, this thought that this is going to be the way to live longer. So I would say, this is not where we want to go. I mean, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be a drug that does the job, but that drug will need 50 years. There are drug targets now that have 50 years of very consistent work showing over and over mice and rats and humans. For example, growth hormone receptor, right? So something we and John Kopchik and many scientists are working on. Yeah, those are the ones that you want to focus on, rather than the ones that nobody's ever shown GLP-1 to make anything live longer. So I don't like these talks of trying to push it on everybody, a little bit like it was tried for statins, right? And it turns out the statin don't make you live longer, right? If they do, they make you live a little bit longer. But statin block cholesterol. What about statin and cognition, for example, right? Is there a negative effect? So yeah, so I think that's a dangerous track. That doesn't mean that some people shouldn't be on GLP-1 receptor agonist, but I think that people should be very careful. The body is this beautiful, perfect, or nearly perfect system, and any way you disrupt it, unless it's a true master regulator like growth hormone receptor or growth hormone releasing hormone receptor, those are the one that science is converged onto. And those, I think, are reasonable. Even those, may have problems, but at least you're starting with, mice that have growth hormone receptor deficiency or growth hormone deficiency live 40% longer. And they have about a 5 to 10-fold increase in disease-free survival, including cognitive performance, right? A very improvement. I mean, yeah, that is a target, right? I mean, over and over and over, done by 20 different laboratories and 50 years of research. We have humans that we follow that have growth hormone receptor deficiency. They don't get cancer. I mean, they get cancer, but a lot less. They're protected from diabetes. Cognitively, they seem to be, having the cognitive, at least based on fMRI, of much younger people. Yeah, so I think if we're going to move to drugs, we need to move to what the research has pointed to.
Awesome. So you're at the cutting edge of this field. What are you most excited about that you've heard about that might be available in the next 6 months to a year that you can talk about?
Well, I'm most excited about the FMD, right? So, and the FMD, of course, is not in the toolkit of physicians all over the world. And I think this is the year where there is enough independent studies. And now I underline this, whether it's Miami or Leiden or Heidelberg or Stanford or lots of different places, these are completely independent of the company. The company didn't pay for it. They didn't seek their trial. So these are very valuable trials. And I think the physicians all over the world should start saying, hey, wait a minute, I'd like to have this in my toolkit. Not everybody's going to do it, but I think it should be made available. And, for the right conditions, diabetes, prediabetes, obesity, maybe some inflammatory conditions, and then stand by for cancer, stand by for, and now I think we're going to start having pretty good data, multiple trials for autoimmunities, especially Crohn's and colitis and some of the other autoimmunities. So, yeah, so then also rheumatologists, et cetera, should start looking into it. Hey, it may not work, but I think it's very, very safe. So far, the safety record has been impressive. Maybe 1 million people have done FMDs now. And so I think that, yeah, that's what I like to see the doctors start saying, okay, let's just, work on multisystemic functionality versus the Band-Aid approach and make the patient healthier, younger, and more functional.
Right. And hopefully this podcast is for the general public. Hopefully people will hear this and actually go to their doctor and say, hey, I want this because, I want to improve my Alzheimer's or whatever chronic condition, or just prevent, to turn back their aging, their biological age.
Yeah. We don't know yet what is going to prevent Alzheimer, but we know it's going to regress diabetes. And, diabetes and insulin resistance being such a strong risk factor for Alzheimer, it's hard to separate the two things, right? It's pretty obvious that it's probably going to help you. So, yeah, and again, all you need is 5 to 10 years of biological age reduction to potentially avoid Alzheimer's altogether. So, yeah, I mean, yes, I think neurologists and every physician should start thinking like that, right? What's extremely safe and very and feasible, right? Because, yeah, you can talk about the Mediterranean diet, but how many people are going to switch to Mediterranean diet? First of all, the effect is relatively small. And then how many people are going to switch to that and stay with that Mediterranean diet? The FMD is also, I think, much more feasible. Now we're just completing 500 people clinical trial in southern Italy where people have been doing it once every 3 months, right? So, the preliminary data look pretty good. We'll see now when we analyze the whole 500 people. This is the largest trial we've ever done. And also the most ambitious because, now it's every 90 days. It's not every month. So what happens if you just do something like that every 90 days? We'll see, but we're very excited about it. And I hope that a lot of physicians will do the same.
Two more quick questions. You started as a musician in college. What do you still listen or make music?
I still play, not very much, and I used to go to the studio up to a couple of years ago and record. I'm recording another album, but it's taken 10 years now. So
10 years. That would be amazing. And last question, where can people find you online, social media? I know you're extremely busy, but yes.
Instagram, Professor Valter Longo, Facebook, Professor Valter Longo, and then the Create Cures Foundation in the U.S. So those are the three main places. Of course, I'm a professor at USC. I've also done some podcasts for USC. So that's, you can also listen to those.
Dr. Longo, thank you so much for your expertise, for coming on this podcast, and frankly, your dedication to this whole field, because I understand this type of research can be all-consuming, and you've thrown yourself at this, and we are all grateful that you're making it possible for us to potentially address Alzheimer's and other chronic conditions. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Great to be on your podcast.